So just a few words to introduce you to Victor Lavy. He's a professor from University of Warwick and Hebrew University. He also works and do many papers for the National Bureau of Economic Research. And it's really honor, a pleasure for us that he's here in Madrid. He came 2 years ago, if I remember correctly, for a seminar at the Ministry of Education. Now he is coming again, and I thank him for giving a seminar in the regional government of Madrid. He has published many papers on economics of education or labor economics. He has published in journals such as American Economic Review, Econometrica, Journal of Public Economics, Economic Journal, Journal of Political Economy, Quarterly Journal of Economics. So the most important reviews in the scientific world, in the economic scientific world, he has published there. So it's really good for us to have a scientific view and empirical evidence about some issues that are debated in the education community. It was just a brief introduction, so I think that we better hear directly from him. Thank you, Victor.
Talk first about a paper that looked at the long-term effect of school choice among primary school students. And if I have time, I was asked to talk about another paper for a few minutes, 10 minutes. So I'll try to do both. So this is a paper about a program that was designed in Tel Aviv, a big city in Israel. The blue is the Mediterranean. So if you go from Madrid east straight, you get to Tel Aviv, more or less. I think Tel Aviv is a bit more south than Madrid, but just on the other side of the Mediterranean. You have 9 school districts of Tel Aviv. From District 1 and 2 are in the north, and District 7, 8, 9 are the southern school district. Each district is a bit autonomous, and they have schools, primary and secondary schools. And what I'm going to analyze today is the beginning of a program that was approved by the government. In a minute you will understand why. The cabinet and the prime minister had to vote to approve this program. It was initially experimental, so only District 9 was introduced into the program for 2 years. And from the third year on, from 1976, the rest of the city was added to the program. All the other districts was enrolled in the school choice program. So the program replaced what we call a busing program. Until June or September of 1993, kids who finished primary school were enrolled in a secondary school from 7th grade to 12th grade, according to a zoning program of the city, and they had no choice whatsoever to which school they can go. So some kids went to school in their neighborhood. They were zoned into a school in the neighborhood. Some schools were zoned into a school in other parts of the city, and they were provided transportation, buses. That's why it's called a busing program, like in the US. And they were driven by buses to schools in the north of the city. The program was part of a national effort to introduce more integration among different socioeconomic classes in schools. It was a law introduced in the parliament in 1968. It said that after primary school, grades from 7 to 8, 9, which were sort of middle schools, have the role of doing integration, absorbing kids in the school from different socioeconomic, so it meant different neighborhoods in the city, in order to create more cohesion in society. Tel Aviv, in 1994, which is like almost 20 years after that law was introduced, was the first one to ask to change and deviate from the national law and introduce school choice, allow kids to choose where they want to go to school. So it was against a law. So the parliament had to vote to agree for this program. Initially, it approved an experiment for 2 years. And after the 2 years of the experiment, it gave the permission for the city to continue on. It was the only school authority in the country that was allowed to have free school choice without integration. And it went on from then on. In 2003, 2004, the city of Jerusalem asked the permission of the government to do the same. And I was lucky to design that one as well in Jerusalem. And from then on, Jerusalem is also part of free school choice. And since then, more and more school districts in the country have enrolled into the school free choice program. So until the program in Tel Aviv was introduced, about 40-45% of the students were bused from District 9, from the south of the city, as you can see from this pear-shaped district, to schools in District 1, 2, 3, and 4. The city has a north and a south. 1, 2, 3, and 4 are the north of the city. It's nicer, it's richer, it's more affluent. 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are poorer in a way, more deprived in terms of socioeconomic background. So usually before the program, kids from District 5 to 9 were bused to the north, and the program actually stopped this busing in District 9 and allowed kids to choose where they want to go out of district to schools. So each kid received a basket of schools, 5 schools, from which he could choose where he wants to go to. 2 of the 5 were in District 9, in his district, 2 of his 5 possible choices, and 3 were in the north. Schools in either 1, 2, 3, or 4, the school district. Okay? So that was the change that was made. Instead of deciding for you which school you go to, you had a choice now that you can decide one of 5 schools that is available to you to go to. This was a big, big change.
Just a small clarification.
Please.
In the pre-1994, this allocation 40-60 was mechanical? What was the...
Okay, so that's a good point. Basically, School District 9 had about 20 primary schools. About half of them, all the kids in those schools, by the end of 6th grade, they had to be bused into the north. So all the students in that schools and all the other 10 schools remained in the district. Okay, so about almost half and a half. After the choice was allowed, it's amazing to find out that again, 45% of the students in the district opted out, decided to go to study in schools in the north of the city. So more or less the same proportion, but it's not the same students. Okay? They came from all the 20 schools, although a higher proportion came from the 10 schools from which before kids were bused to the north. Okay? So before, just to summarize, before the choice, about almost half of the students were bused to the north. After kids were allowed to choose freely, again, almost half of the students willingly decided to go and study in the north. Okay?
Excuse me, one question. If they had to choose 5 schools,
1 out of 5. They ranked the school.
One.
No. They ranked out of the 5 that they have, first choice, second choice, third choice, they ranked the choice.
And do you know if the first and second choice was District 9 or if it was mixed?
The first and second.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I said,
What did parents want first? To stay or to go?
no. So as I said, about 45% of the students chose their first choice to go up north, and they received it. And 55% more or less received chose the first choice in the district. Okay? So it is sort of amazing because the pressure to change the system came from the parents, not from the authorities, not from the school authorities in Tel Aviv. It's the parents who were not happy that their kids are bused to the north. So you would think that once they're given a choice, they would prefer to stay close to home. No. There were many, many parents, about half, and kids who wanted to go up north. So what I did in a previous paper, which was published in Review of Economic Studies in July 2010, is that I followed the children from the moment they made the choice until they finished high school at 12th grade. And I examined what happened to them in terms of completing high school, because compulsory schooling in Israel was at the time until 10th grade. So whether they have completed the high school, 12 years of schooling at a higher proportion compared to before. How did they do in what we call the matriculation exam, which is the baccalaureate? I think you have in Spain something similar. At the end of high school, in the last more or less 2 grades of high school, mostly in the last year of high school, kids take many, many tests. On average, there are about 7 compulsory and about 4 or 5 electives, so almost 11, 12 exams. And then if you pass all of them, you get a baccalaureate, you get a matriculation diploma, which is very important in Israel because it's prerequisites to go to a university. So I examined the impact of the program on those outcomes over 6 years, and I found large gains in academic outcomes of the students who were given access to free choice. I also examined what happens to the environment in schools in terms of violence, bullying, social satisfaction of students, satisfaction from the school, parental satisfaction. All that I examined with data that I had through the Ministry of Education, surveys with all the students in the control group and the treatment group, which I'll explain in a minute. And I showed that violence declined dramatically in schools, happiness and social satisfaction increased, et cetera, et cetera. So there was sort of medium-term analysis of what the program did. And what I do in this study that I'm talking about you today is I follow these kids until they are 31 years old. Okay? So they made choice when they were 12 years old, and now they are about 30, so 18 years later. Okay? So almost 2 decades after them and their parents decided where they want to go to school, I examine what happened to them in terms of post-secondary schooling. Did the gains in high school translate into going at a higher rate to academic schooling, universities, colleges, etc.? Are they completing more years of schooling? Are they working at a higher rate? Do they have lower unemployment rate? Do they receive lower unemployment benefits from the government? Are their earnings higher or lower as a result? Are they married? How many kids they have? Are those outcomes different from the control group? So sort of long-term outcome of the program. Now, why is that important? I mean, all of us are dealing with education, and everything we do in primary and middle school is geared towards adulthood. We want to do better with our students at the earlier cycles of schooling, kindergarten, primary school, secondary school, in order to allow kids to achieve better outcomes as adults, to be better citizens, to understand democracy, to be better human being, to have higher human capital, to have a better standard of living, well-being in the future. So really the long-term outcomes are really the goal of whatever we invest in early childhood and human capital formation during all these cycles of schooling. So really what we want to know at the end of the day is whatever we do earlier on with interventions and programs and experiments, does it pay off in the long term? So we know that most of the research in economics of education until about 10 years ago was focused on short-term and medium-term outcomes. But now there is a tendency, a trend of doing analysis on the long term. It's a consequence of few things. First of all, we have more and more evidence that the return to schooling in the labor market is very, very important, basically determine the life cycle of individuals in many ways if they are more educated. So there is an importance, there is a lot of evidence about the importance of human capital. Schooling is one element of human capital. Second of all, we're gaining access to data which we didn't have before. And you will see what I do here, some people do in other countries, using administrative data of the type some of you might have here, to follow with administrative data individuals from birth to their current age, and being able to measure outcomes with administrative data. The advantage is that you don't lose anyone along the way, because through administrative data you have individual IDs, national IDs. That's in Israel, for example, in Norway, in Denmark, in Finland, in Sweden. People have individual IDs. From the moment they are born at the hospital, they are given an ID, and you can use that ID to follow them until death, okay? And follow them to their parents and siblings and extended family. You can do many, many things. Plus, you can merge into these data sets all administrative data. For example, the tax authority data. I'm sure you have it in Spain. They have information about earnings of every individual. The ID is in those files, so you can merge it into your basic data. The ministry has information about students. You merge it in. So this data became available in many countries, and it led to this movement of being able to do long-term analysis of early schooling intervention. So there are several studies that I want to mention to you here that looks at different intervention. For example, the first one, look at the program Head Start. Head Start is a program, I'm sure you heard about it in the US, started in mid-1960s, targeting interventions and resources to young children in Black and Hispanic families, low socioeconomic. And in these two studies, they do long-term analysis. There was already short-term studies about Head Start. Garces and Deming, these two papers, look at the labor market and crime consequences at adulthood of Head Start, okay? This is a very famous early childhood program, the Perry preschool program in the US, maybe the most famous program targeted to kids from age 0 to 1 or 2. So this is a long-term follow-up of that. Chetty is a program that looked at kindergarten intervention when they reduced class size, the Tennessee experiment, and followed the individuals to adulthood until age 27 and look at their wages. Chetty, in another paper, look at effect of quality of teaching, value added of teachers in New York and Boston, and look at the labor market consequences. And this is a paper of mine looking at the consequence of paying teachers some bonuses based on the performance of their students. This is a high school intervention, and I follow individuals to the end of high school. So there are several studies that look at long-term consequences. I look at school choice. There are some programs that look at school choice effect on long-term outcomes, mainly or only up to post-secondary schooling. My paper is the first one to look at employment and earnings as well. So I'm sort of have more complete set of outcomes at adulthood, both university schooling, academic schooling, and then employment, labor market outcomes, marriage, children, fertility, and so on. Okay, so let me move a little, well, let me summarize the finding just so that you know what to expect towards the end. I find that the school program, the school choice program, improved participation in academic schooling by about 5 percentage points. Okay? All the improvement is in academic colleges, but zero effect on enrollment and schooling in universities. In Israel, we have 7 research universities and 50, 60 academic colleges. All the gains that I will show you are in academic colleges, none in any level of universities. This is not unexpected because District 9 students came from very low socioeconomic families. So the marginal students who benefited from the program and went on to academic schooling were not at the level that they can go to universities, but it improved their outcomes so that they can go to colleges. So we see that in the data. I will show you that they have a significant increase in earnings, about a 5% increase in earnings by age 30-31, which is about 6-7%. So a meaningful increase in standard of living as measured by their income. So the data that I use is administrative data because it is data where individuals are identified by individual ID, etc. I don't have access to it in my office. I work in a government lab where all the data is placed. And me and my research assistants go every day to the lab, and we work on the data. They basically get all the data sources for us and place it on a server, and I can merge any way I want the data, but I cannot take anything out as long as I use the data for research. At the end, I can ask an extract of the data when it will be published to put on a website of the journal. That's a condition of journals. But then the data is structured in a way that no one can identify any individual. So it's totally anonymous. Okay? Even when I work now in the lab, it's anonymous. I cannot identify individuals. I cannot tell who they are, what's their name, where they live exactly, etc. So that's a very useful way to get access to data without breaching legal barriers to keeping anonymity with the data. So the data is at the lab. The Ministry of Education, that's something I should tell you. All the data is placed in an organization called the National Insurance in Israel. It's sort of like the Social Security Administration of Israel. And they have a lab and they get all this data from different sources. The Ministry of Education have also a lab where they put all their own data available online. You can work from your office. So if you're a university professor, you submit a proposal and you get access. You get a permission and you get a code and you can get in line to the ministry computer. They have all the data again in their own server. You can basically get whatever you want from different data sets, merge as you want, and keep it in your own library in the ministry. And that's fantastic because I can work from my office. And they also, of course, make sure that you cannot identify individuals beyond anonymous IDs. What they do is they place an anonymous ID, a fictitious ID, for a student in all the files that the students appears, and you can link them. So this is something I think you should think about. The ministry have done it 5 years ago, and it really increased the amount of research on education in Israel. You won't believe by how much, okay? Data is, as you know, is power, okay? And it's also power in our area of research. And this is amazing. I think if you can do that here, you will see in 5 years how much research on Spanish data is done with the data that you will allow access to. So this is my 1-minute pitch on getting data for research. Okay, so let me move a bit faster. So I measure as educational outcome enrollment in one of the universities or enrollment in one of the academic colleges. And then I also measure how many years you have completed in each of these schooling track. I look at your earnings. I look at your employment. I have your eligibility for unemployment benefit and how much you receive. And now let me go and talk about how do I measure the treatment effect. You know that the change in the students before the program and the students after the program is not a good measure of the effect of the program because many other things could have happened during this period before and after. And if I don't take care of those things that might have happened between those years, I might assign to the program something that is caused by something else altogether. So we need a control group, as you know, a comparison group, a control group. Randomized experiments create for us a control group. In this context, the program was not done randomly. The city decided to implement the program in District 9. So how do I create a comparison group? You see that this is the area that was in the program, District 9. First of all, you see District 6 and 8 are very similar to District 9 in terms of socioeconomic program, but they were not in the program. The same thing about 5 and 7. So I look at 5, 6, 7, and 8 before and after the program and use it as a comparison group for before and after in District 9. So this is one comparison group. That they are a bit more underprivileged than District 9. But then you see two cities to the right of District 9. One is called Ramat Gan, and one is called Givatayim. These are two independent cities with independent municipality and school authority. And they did not do any change in terms of school choice when Tel Aviv implemented the school choice. So a second comparison group is these two cities. Then there is another city here, which also adjacent to District 9. It's called Holon. And they also didn't do anything at the time that Tel Aviv implemented the school choice. So it's a third comparison group. So in the first paper, I did the analysis 3 times, one with this group, one with this group as a comparison group, and one with a group of the city in the south. And I showed that the results are identical regardless of which group I use as a comparison group. That was important to do because these are worse than 9, these areas in Tel Aviv. These are much better, and the city in the south is more or less similar. So it was nice to show that regardless of the quality of the population in the comparison group, you get similar results. A second exercise was to do this. This is District 9. I magnified the area of District 9. Okay? So the blue line is the border between Tel Aviv and these two cities on the right. This is one street of 5.5 kilometers. From here to here is 5.5 kilometers. On the left of the street, one side of the street, it's like Via Gran Via. One side of Gran Via is Madrid. The other side of the houses on Gran Via is Barcelona. Okay? So in a way, you can compare and you see that the housing prices on one side of the street are exactly the housing prices on the other side of the street. And when you compare the type of people living on the left and on the right, they are very similar in terms of background, income, etc. So I compare only people who live just on the left to people who just live on the left, on the right. And this is what we call a regression discontinuity analysis. And I do the analysis with a subsample where the people are very similar to each other, left and right, and I compare what happened to those who were on the left and received choice versus those who were on the right and did not receive choice. Okay, so that's what I did in the first paper. Practically, in terms of technical analysis, I run a regression when the outcome are on the left-hand side, y, and I have z, which is whether you had choice or did not have choice. I use 2 cohorts before 1974, both in Tel Aviv and in the comparison group, students who finished 6th grade before the program started. So in a way, they missed the train, okay? So they had to go to secondary school according to the zoning system. But their brother, who is younger, and he was finishing 6th grade at the right time, meaning in June 1993, he started in September of 1993, high school, secondary school, in a school that he chose to go to. Okay? So that's the exercise in a way. So let me show you some descriptive statistics that will motivate the empirical analysis. I'll just mention one thing which is very important in the current context of school choice. You know that there is now a big movement in the US that take into considerations when designing choice program. It's not only about school choice program, it's about donating a kidney or selecting a graduate of law schools to law firms or doctors after they finish their schooling and they go to a hospital for training. The matching between doctors and hospitals, and there is a choice involved in that as well. And people, when they make a choice, might take into account what is the likelihood that I will get my first choice. And if I want to go to a school that is very, very demanded, very popular school, I and my parents may decide not to choose that school as my first choice because I know the likelihood of getting it is very low or lower than others because many would like that school. And I might write number one in my list of school choice, not the one I really prefer, but the second one that I prefer. Why? Because I want to make sure I'm getting at least the second one. This is called strategic choice, and there are now many economists working on theories of that type of behavior and designing mechanisms of choice that will avoid the inefficiency involved by individuals choosing not their first choice, their best choice, but the second choice. In Tel Aviv, way back, like 25 years ago when we worked on this program, we had that in mind, and what we did was to promise students that they will get their first choice. How could we promise them? Okay? How can we promise them to get the first choice? We promised them because the city agreed that the supply in every school would be flexible, especially in the very good schools who we thought earlier on they will be popular. Now, how can, I mean, you have a building and you have that many classes, how can you promise that you will absorb any excess demand? We promised because the schools and the city agreed to place mobile class sizes, okay, classrooms in the yard of the school in case there is excess demand until the school will be expanded somehow, okay? So 98% of the students actually got their first choice. So this whole issue of strategic design, and I know, for example, in Barcelona now, there is a study of that with taking into account what's the impact of this strategic behavior. In our context, it wasn't really relevant because we understood that and we promised the population that successful schools will be expanded. So if, in principle, many of the kids in the school want to go to a school that is very popular, the city will make everything possible to accommodate that demand, okay? They actually were successful. After a while, you know that if school choice work very well, the quality of all schools goes up, and there will be a new equilibrium where demand will be distributed across all schools. Another thing that I believe, and this is again a policy issue, is that if there is a good school, and over time you see that there is excess demand, my personal view, and I was able to convince the mayor in Jerusalem to do that, is to multiply that school. So create a twin of that school. So if there is school, let's say in Salamanca, that is very, very good, and everybody want to go to that school, and it's called Salamanca 1, we take the headmaster of that school and we create Salamanca 2. And we randomly assign the teachers of Salamanca 1 into 1 and 2, and we bring new teachers with the same headmaster, okay? And then you will have sub-headmasters in 2 schools. So if there's a good schools, you should, that's my belief, ride on a success, and because it's very hard to know why a school is very good, okay? This is a black box. And until now, we know a little bit of the elements, why teachers are very good, why headmaster is very good. This is really sort of a mystery still. After many years of research in economics of education, we don't know exactly how to create good teachers. Okay? We maybe can identify good teachers, but we cannot tell why they are good teachers and how can we create other good teachers. So I believe in this approach of riding on success. If there is a good school and the people want to go to that school, why not? Just make that school multiply into 2 and have a campus, maybe 3 schools, okay? Anyway, so that was the idea in Tel Aviv. So we go back to the data now. You will tell me how much I have as we go along, like, okay? So this is the evidence on the two cohorts of sixth graders who finished sixth grade in 91, in 92, and in 91 and in 92 before the program started. So this is their the schools in the comparison in District 9, the kids, and this would be the data for the comparison group. So this is, for example, enrollment in university. So in District 9, before the program, about 18% of the students went on to study university, and 21% went on to study in colleges. In the comparison group, it was higher, 24% here and 27% here, and this is the differences, 6% and 6%, and this is the standard error, so this is statistically significant differences. So the comparison group here, which is all the three groups of comparison that I used, I pulled them together, they are still better before the program than District 9, okay? And this is the cohort, the first cohort that was in the program, okay? 16% in the treated schools, which is not very different from 17, 18, 23%, which is like 23% here, and the difference is still minus 7%, almost like minus 6% here. So you can see that before and after are more or less the same gap. So no improvement in university. The gap in colleges was 6%, and it went down to about 3%. So there is a gain here. And what we want to know is whether the reduction in the gap from 6 to 3% is significant, okay, when we measure it more carefully. Okay? This is in terms of number of years, and you see that before there was a gap of almost a third of a year, which stays the same. So no change in university schooling before and after. And here there is the gap, which was a negative gap, declined. Now, this is not the optimal setup for studying the impact of the program. You want to know, you want to show that the improvements is a result of an improvement in the treated group and not a decline relative to other group. But this is the context, and the fact that we don't see an improvement in university and we only see an improvement in academic college, either enrollment or years of schooling, sort of gives some credibility to these gains. And this was the same in the analysis in the first paper, and I sort of convinced the academic community that the results are credible, because I've done it in so many ways and got the same result, that it was published like in a very, very top journals, one of the first top journals. So now I want to measure carefully these differences. If you look at earnings, you see that there was a gap in earnings in favor of the control group before, and it reduced by about 1,500, this is Israeli shekels, 1,500 shekels a year. And the question is whether that gain would be precise or will be larger when I do a more careful analysis. So basically that's the exercise. Here is about personal marriage. About 52% were married before. In the treatment group, in the control group, it was 50, okay? And then after, there is sort of an increase in the marriage rate here. The question is whether that will be sustained by the careful analysis. Number of children, they have about half a child by age 30. It's more or less the same in both groups. And this is this is whether they have a child or not. About half of them have a child, and about 2/3 of a child on average by age 30. Okay, so that's the descriptive statistics and the differences. Okay, so I will use mainly graphs to show you because everything is in the graphs. So here I look at enrollment in universities. I have the data for every year from the year they finished high school. So I measure the impact of the program 1 year after finishing high school, 2 years after finishing high school, 3 years after, until 13 years after finishing high school. Okay? I do that for everything, and I adjust for age, because the cohort who are finishing earlier in the comparison group are 1 or 2 years older, so they have more time to enroll in university schooling. So I adjust everything and I measure everything in terms of number of years since finishing high school. So you see that university enrollment is practically zero. That's the green line. No effect. The shaded line is the confidence interval, statistical 10% confidence interval. It covers zero. So you see that there is no change in going to university. This is, the blue line, is the mean in the control group of enrollment in university. And you see that it's increasing from zero. Year 2000, 2001, 2000 is where they finish high school. So it goes up slowly. Why don't we have anything here? Like in Spain, I would expect this to jump immediately, right? But in Israel, they go to the military service for 3 years. So there is no university schooling for 3 years. Very few are not going to the military, okay? So you get some action here of those who did not go to the military and go to schooling. But after 3 years, when they finish the military, it starts rising and reaches more or less a plateau here of about 17% who goes to university. But no impact of the program. So that's the treatment effect already. No treatment effect on going to university. This is number of years of university schooling. Again, it increases until on average about 2/3 of years of schooling. Zero effect. So no effect of the program on going to a university or how many years you go to university. This is on going to academic colleges. So you see, it's increasing the average, but the program effect is a beginning zero. You are in the army here, then you start going, and it reaches 5%, and it's stable more or less 5% and doesn't change anymore. So the program have improved the rate at which students who are affected by the program going to academic colleges. Academic colleges are sort of colleges that confer BA degree, some of them also master degree by now, a 3-year program, mostly in humanities and social science, a lot in law schools and business schools. No science, okay? No sciences. And basically, most of them would require matriculation diploma, but some of them actually would not insist on getting a matriculation, as long as, even if you miss one subject or two in your test for the matriculation, they might get you admitted. Universities requires full baccalaureate and a certain average score to be admitted to universities and to some programs. So these students that are in this program, most of them who have improved, do not reach a threshold that will allow them to be enrolled in university, and that's why I don't find an effect. And I find an effect on academic colleges. And you can see that this enrollment has the equivalent part in terms of how many years they have gained. So on average, about half a year of a college, and this is, no, I'm sorry, the half is the average for the whole students who go, and this is the gain. About 1/5 of years of schooling. So the program significantly, and you can see the standard error, the confidence interval, it's significant already from 2005. So after 5-6 years since completing high school, the gain is very, very robust and very much there, okay? So then I estimate the thing in terms of regressions, and I get the same results. I won't spend much time on that. So now I go on and look in the same way, measure the impact on employment and earnings. Now, I have how much money you earned every year since you finished high school. Now, for the first 3 years, most of the people are in the military. Their earnings are more or less zero. They just get a soldier salary, which is very low. Not all go to the military. So there is some people who are actually already in university or working part-time or full-time, those who didn't go to colleges and universities. They are mainly girls who are religious and are exempted from going to the military. So about 60% of the girls go to the military service and about 90% of the boys go. So now you can look at the effect on wages. The blue line is the mean wages for every year since high school, and this is the scale they measure that, from 10,000 shekels to 80,000 shekels a year by the last year, which was 2 years ago. 80,000 shekels is about $22,000. So average earnings of an individual in the treated group 11, 12 years after high school is about $22,000. What's the impact of the program? This is the green line here. And you can see that at the beginning it's sort of positive, negative, small numbers, but basically not different from zero. The gray line is the confidence interval. It's starting rising after 3-4 years from high school, and it continually rise. Now you see that this figure is not as smooth as the data I have, the graph I showed you on enrollment in colleges and universities. That is a less volatile measure than wages. Wages depends whether you work in that year, how much you work, full-time, part-time. You might give birth. If you are a woman, you are out of the labor force, you come back, etc. So, but the trend is definitely positive, increasing, and then it stabilized more or less here. And the confidence interval suggested is just significantly different from 0 to 10% level. So there is an impact of just about 3,000. No, this is 30,000. This is the impact. Okay, so here is the annual income, and this is the impact of the program. So the green line here is about 4,000 shekels. So if you look at the last year, it's about 4,000. A year before, just below that. The year before, about the same. Okay, so the program have increased earning by 3,000 to 4,000 shekels a year. The mean is about 75, 80,000. So it's just about 4 or 5% increase in wages. Okay, so that's not a trivial gain. Okay, so the program, 15 years or 20 years after you made choice, is paying off in terms of you not only gaining on average more academic schooling, in this case colleges, but also the return to your extra schooling is rewarded by the labor market by about 4%, 5% at most increase in earnings.
Victor.
Yes.
This is the same people. I mean, this is a kind of longitudinal analysis. So you follow the first cohort that takes advantage of the new program, and you follow all the time.
Yes.
So maybe you can do the same for the next cohorts.
Well, the next, the whole city was already involved.
Okay, so.
But I mean, at the time, I focused on the first cohort because they were the one. Remember, I did this more than 10 years ago, so they were the first one to finish high school, and I had data. Otherwise, I would have to wait for the second and third and fourth cohort at a time. Okay. Now I can do that, of course. And last night, I woke up at 3 a.m., and I said, what can I add to this paper? And I thought, why exactly this point? Why can't I actually expand the analysis? Because of this, okay? Because not of the schooling. You saw the schooling is a sharp and well identified. If I go back here, see, this is really sharp. Okay, definitely highly significant, very stable, sort of not noisy so much, okay? But when I go here, earnings is always a more noisy measure, okay? And I have here people who work as independent workers and also as salaried worker, okay? An independent worker, you know, they might have some, like in 2008, 2009, there was a crisis. You experienced that as well in Spain, so things can jump up and down. So I thought if I will increase the sample, I will be able to measure this impact, but more precisely, okay? So I have power to reject that it's different from that it's equal to 0 at the 10% level, but I really would have liked that the gray area to be narrower, especially at the end. So one way of doing it is adding more observations, and that I can do by adding cohort as you suggest. So that's a good idea. I might still do that. Please.
Related to that, do you have a measure of wealth? Because that would be also a way to maybe more synthetically analyze the economic impact.
I don't have measure of wealth. I can actually, I can measure what the cumulative amount of income they had. What I do now, not wealth, I told you that basically through this administrative data, I can link everything to everything. So I asked the authorities to link to my data the parents and their earnings from 1990 on. Okay, so I'm adding now to the paper before submitting it to a journal. I'm doing intergenerational analysis of transmission. So looking at how the program have affected the correlation between the children income and the parents' income. This is a whole area of research in economics of intergenerational mobility. Now it came back to fashion. You saw maybe papers by Russ Chetty in the US showing which areas in the US are more mobile and which are less, etc. So I'm adding to that. So this is in a way looking at how your income relates to the wealth of your parents, because I can measure permanent income of parents. And I do it for the mother and for the father and for the households. And I also look at the correlation between schooling of the father and your own schooling. But they are young to have wealth unless they inherited wealth. Whatever they earned, I can sum. But if they got some inheritance from the parents, like an apartment or something like that, I would not know. That's my phone, I guess. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so this is the impact on earnings, and again, I do it in a regression analysis, and one thing I can do to reduce the noise is basically stack together earnings from 9, 10, and 11 years since high school. Instead of looking at 1 year in the statistical analysis, I put together a panel of 3 years, because by then they finished their college schooling and they are all in the labor market, and I practically get a bit more precision. So it's about 3,500, which is about 4%, 5%, as I said, and it's meaningful. Now, the question is, what explained this 5%? I said that on average, they got a fifth of a year of schooling, a fifth. Now, if all the increase in income is because they studied 0.2 more of years of schooling in college, that means that the return to a year of schooling is 25%. That's very high. Okay? We know that the rate of return to university schooling in Israel is about 14, 15%. If you go to 1 more year in college or university, on average, you should expect your salary to increase over time, your earnings, by about 14, 15%. If you gain 1 more year of high school, it would be 8 or 9%. So the rate of return to schooling cannot explain a 25% return to schooling. So where is the other 10 percentage point gain in earnings coming from? Okay, I have to explain that. Now, I don't know, I'm sure that I'm not sure, but you will tell me whether in Spain is the same. We know that in Israel, if you get a baccalaureate, your earnings will increase even if you don't go anymore to more schooling. So think about 2 kids who finish 12 years of schooling and no more. One has a baccalaureate, the other one doesn't. The one who has in Israel will gain about 20% more in his earnings in the labor market than the one who doesn't. Is it the same in Spain?
Yes, it's very similar. So we have
Yeah.
the data from Education at a glance, and it's very similar.
So
20%.
practically, I'm just going to shut it down. So one element of the increase is not only the years of schooling, is the fact that you got a back. And even if you didn't go and there is an increase in the back. I mean, I didn't show you precisely, that was the first paper. So part of the increase is due to a higher quality of schooling. Now, I show in the paper, the first one, not only you get a higher bac rate, baccalaureate rate, you also have a higher average score. You also study more math and science on average. You study more units in high school. You know, that's how it's classified in Israel, credit units. So all these are rewarded in the labor market. So what I do here, I do this exercise, okay? So I run regression. This is the gain in enrollment in colleges, and this is in years of college, okay? That's what I estimated in the tables before. Now what I do is I start I'm adding variables to account, like here I add the average matriculation score. And here I add the regression, whether you got a baccalaureate, etc. And I see by how much the impact of the program is declining. So basically, it's not kosher because all of these are sort of outcomes affected by the program. So it's really not legal to put them in a regression on the right-hand side. But just for getting sort of an idea, how much of the program is reduced by accounting for the program effects on other outcomes. And you can see that by the end, when I add all of them together, from 0.04 I go to 0, and from 0.18 I go to 0. So really, all these outcomes in high school are correlated with the effect on university schooling, college schooling, okay? So the gain in academic colleges is explained in a way, in a non-purely good scientific method, by the gains in high school. And then I do the same thing for earnings. Okay, and you see the gain was like 4,000 at the last year. So I start adding the matriculation score. It already goes down to, I mean, this is the effect of the program when I control for the matriculation score. It goes from 4 to about 2,000. When I control for whether you got a back, it goes down from 4 to about 3. When I control for the number of credit units, it goes from 4 to about 2. Then I put all the 4 together, and it goes from 4 to 1,300. So about 2/3 of the increase in wages can be explained by the high school improvements, who also affected the university and college enrollment outcome. Okay, so this is really sort of a back of the envelope, sort of non-clean exercise of accounting for the effect of the program. Okay, so let me summarize what I did in this paper. I said that it's very important for society to think about educational intervention in terms of long-term outcome. At the end of the day, when you want, as a Ministry of Education, to decide what to do, when I have a budget constraint, I can reduce class size, I can improve teachers' training, I can introduce more charter school, I can provide more stipends or grants to low socioeconomic students. I can do a variety of things. I know more or less how things are working from studies all over the world that looked at short-term outcomes. But then, in order to be convinced that I'm picking the one that is most effective, I have to focus also on the long-term outcome. I really want to know which of this intervention improves university and college schooling the most, which improves employment probabilities the most, which improve earnings the most. For that, I need to do analysis of the type that I'm doing, and our profession is now doing that. And this is the first one that looks at school choice, which is a very popular topic of analysis in the US, in Europe, everywhere. So this is the contribution of this paper, of quantifying the long-term effect, showing that school choice has meaningful implications for the livelihood of people in the long run. Okay? So I'm open to questions and yes, please.
I have sort of two questions. The first is, in taking the sort of the minister planning perspective that you were saying, I guess you could decompose the effects in two parts. One is sort of the better matching between alum students and institutes, given capacity, and the second one is there's a supply effect which is quite significant, all this commitment to put the mobile classes. I mean, is it fair to say that without the supply effect, we don't know probably, it's difficult to calculate, but without the supply effect, maybe the impact would have been much, much smaller. So the random effect by itself, given capacity, probably wouldn't have accounted for so much, whether yes or not. And the other question, I fully agree that it's great that, it's a privilege that you have the long-term data and that gives much more information. However, now your last results on this sort of the composition of the effect within how much can be accounted because of scores, etc., and matriculation. The sense it gives is that, okay, if you cannot have this data if you target somehow your policy by getting good scores, good matriculation, you're getting the bulk, no? So it's good news in a way, no?
Exactly. I like that point that you made. But it was off all the time.
No, I guess it's because I...
Oh, I see. Oh. I like the point you make, and I should emphasize it more in the paper, is that's the good news, that the short and medium-term outcomes are good proxies for understanding what happens in the future. Okay? So I'm not the first one to show that earnings are correlated with test scores early on in life. Okay? But it was nice to see that this is working in this setup. Because people ask me, so what are the mechanisms? So the mechanisms, I go back to your first point. Definitely matching is an important. Why? And the supply is also important, but matching is important. Why? Because before there was 45% going up north, and after also 45% going up north. But it's different type of kids. Okay? It's not the same kids, and different families from different schools. Before it was 10 schools, now they come from all the 20 schools. So matching definitely is important. Another, and all this I analyzed in the first paper, it's also competition among schools. There was 2 schools who were closed during this program, because if there's an expansion of enrollment in other schools, some place had to give up, and they have closed 2 schools because of that. And that, again, something that I really believe. I don't know what's your views on this, but I believe that you should not keep parents and kids captive prisoners to bad schools, even if those schools are in the neighborhood. You should not think in terms it's important to have a school in the community, and for that purpose, I'm willing to sacrifice the quality of education of kids who live in that neighborhood. If I cannot create a good school in the neighborhood, I should allow kids to go away from that neighborhood to schools, okay? Because kids, in a way, were born, unfortunately, to parents who do not have all the means to provide them with more resources. They are loving them, they are nurturing them in the best way they can, but they don't have all the human capital and not the resources to give the kids what other kids are getting from their parents. So you should not penalize the kids the third time and force them to go to schools who apparently are not producing enough value added. Okay? So my belief is that if that's the situation, close the school and let the kids go elsewhere to a good school. Okay? And if over time there'll be a better school open in that neighborhood, that's fine. But no way I would recommend sacrificing the future of cohorts of kids, because the ideology is that we should have schools in the neighborhood. If parents and kids vote by their leg and they want to go elsewhere, let them go elsewhere. So I think competition led to that, and the city understood that. And that's why they absorbed this notion. It's amazing, okay, because we're talking about almost 25 years ago when the program was designed on the table. And the mayor and others understood this notions of access to quality of education, freedom of access, expanding good schools, closing or reducing size of schools who are not that successful, and let the dynamics take its own impact over time. So back to your question, I think it's both the matching, it's the competition, perhaps, and I cannot decompose all those effects, is the involvement of parents, because once you choose, there was like market fairs where schools came and introduced their product in a way. A lot of people in education hated that, said, wow, education is not a regular product in the market. How can we think about schools convincing and marketing their product? No, I think it's important, if only for the reasons that it actually pull parents to be involved in their parents' education. Okay, so who made the choice? Sometimes I'm asked, is it the father, the mother, or the kid? I don't know. It's the family together, probably, in many cases. Okay, and that, I think, involved the parents in their kids' education. And the fact that I showed in the earlier paper that kids are much happier after the program, they're more satisfied socially. One thing that I didn't mention, and I have 2 papers about it, is that we introduced this sort of unusual element in school choice program when we allowed each student to list 8 friends with whom he wants to be in school when he moves from primary to middle school. Okay? Together with the choice of 5 schools, he had to list up to 8 friends. And the program promised that he will have at least 2 in the school, not in the class. Okay? So I have a paper looking at social network of students and how that affected the well-being and the outcomes of students. So that was an element in the program as well that we usually don't think about in school choice program. Detaching kids from their neighborhood might be negative for students, and that's what we show in that study. So all those are mechanisms that go back to your earlier point.
I fully agree with the idea of not letting bad schools persist, but maybe there are alternatives to closing, which is some type of market for takeovers or just a competition by which the school that is not performing can be more or less easily replaced by one that is performing. You see what I mean?
No, I didn't understand.
You get some type of yardstick competition or market for takeover, so that one school, good school, may replace a not so good school, so that you don't have to close necessarily. You just have to change management.
Right. So in Jerusalem, in the program in Jerusalem, the mayor was sort of a bit ironic. The mayor who appointed me as the head of the chairman of the committee that designed the school choice program in Tel Aviv was Ehud Olmert. He was a mayor. When we started the work, we worked on the program for 1.5 years. And after 1.5 years, he decided to go back to national politics and became minister in the cabinet of Sharon. And there was another mayor appointed who was ultra-Orthodox religious. And when we submitted the program, he basically was the one to receive our report. And he practically put it in the shelf. So 2 years later, there was election, and the person elected to mayor of Jerusalem was a member of my committee who designed that program. And he was one of the forces who was pushing Olmert to go with that. So he immediately implemented the program. Okay? As you know, Olmert became prime minister, and unfortunately, last week he went to jail. He started his service in jail for 2 years because of all kinds of corruption. Okay? So in Jerusalem, in the program that was implemented from 2006, when this guy became a mayor of the city, we have cases like that. When a school was very weak, they did not close, they invested a lot of resources in that school, they changed the headmaster, and that school became very popular, actually. But there was a very failing school, and what the mayor did, some of the things that I learned from the new mayor, who actually came from high-tech and it did an exit, gaining almost $1 billion in this exit with his 2 brothers. And he's serving as a mayor already for 10 years as a volunteer, not getting any salary because he's so rich. He introduced to me, in a way, the concept of going on with success cases, okay? And what he did in Jerusalem, he opened a campus of 3 schools, one of them dedicated to the art, one to science, and one to something else, music. When he took the best successful school in the city, was highly demanded, and built around it 3 high schools with one head. So it's sort of university with social science, humanities, and sciences with deans, okay? And it works beautifully. So he's very sort of entrepreneurship in a way. Please.
Well, congratulations for your paper, and thank you very much for your presentation, which has been very interesting. And I'm sure papers like yours will be very useful for decision makers. But I'm very interested in education policies. Okay. And I'd like to know if you can, if you know the answer, I'd like to know what was the reason to change the system and to offer school choice in a situation which apparently was not very bad. And what was the reaction of the politicians after the results, seeing that the same number of students still continued moving from one district to another? And another question I'd like to know, I could ask you many questions, but I'm going to limit my questions, is how long ago did parents know that the program was going to start? In order to see how the decision they took was well think or something that happened very quickly in their family?
Well, the situation before was not as good as you have in mind. And as I said, the parents in the south, from which kids were transported or bused to the north, were very unhappy. They were not unhappy from the fact, I think, that the kids went to good schools in the north. They were unhappy from the fact that they were not received very well in the north, and they went there sometimes against their will. Okay? So it's true, you're right, the program did not change the number of students who traveled up north, but now they go because they chose to go to. That makes a whole lot of a difference when you are forced to do something versus you are choosing yourself to do something. Your motivation, your self-image, your integration in the community. Now, it's not that the schools in the north were very happy, because later on when the program was implemented, and sometimes there's one school that they have expanded capacity so much, but still there was excess demand, and they did for 3 years a lottery. And there was few kids from the neighborhood of the school who lost the lottery, and they could not go to that school. And they had to drive somewhere else for a school. And they appealed to the Supreme Court twice, okay, twice. And the Supreme Court turned them down because they said the general equilibrium welfare analysis is more important than the well-being of few families in the north, okay? So I think that the situation improved because people exercised their free choice. I was listening again. I said I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning. So I opened and you know, in YouTube, I studied in Chicago, and Milton Friedman was my teacher in price theory. So I said, let me look at some program of Milton Friedman. In YouTube, you can get him participating in debates, lecturing, doing everything from 2 minutes to an hour of a lecture. So I looked at some few, you know, short ones, 5 minutes, 15 minutes. One of them was about, he actually in the 1960s wrote an article about introducing vouchers to kids in the public system to allow them free choice to private school. And he was the champion of freedom and of free choice, right? And he elaborates on how important it is for individuals, and I believe in that. Now, I think the evidence that I produce is that kids are happier now, given that they are exercising their choice. In terms of public policy for education, and I already said many things I think that could be distilled into policy discussion. I mean, I don't know the context exactly in Madrid. I was in the Barcelona Forum, not last year, the year before. The year before, they had a panel of 3 people. There was Borjas from Harvard, Me and Katerina, she's now at Senfi.
Yes, we know. She gave a
Right.
seminar.
So we were debating actually school choice and the effect on immigrants and how to design that. And there were many policymakers in the room. And I don't think there was disagreement between the three of us about this issue. So three economists who come from different directions, all were in favor of allowing free choice. Sometimes the issue of free choice is confused with schools choosing students, okay? This is not free choice. And that's where you get the negative consequences of choice. Choice is when the kids and their parents choose schools. Schools should not have any say about who are their students, at least not in primary school, middle school, and high school, okay? Otherwise, there is no free access to educational quality, okay? Of course, schools would choose the best students and will, create segregation by quality and by background of students and by the color of the hair and by the color of the eyes. We know that, and we don't want that, okay? Again, this goes back to a point where I involve ideology with scientific work. I believe that in early ages, at least until age 12, 13, 14, and for some kids it's even later, your true potential is not yet revealed, especially if you come from a poorer background. And I forced, in the program in Jerusalem, to accept students who want to study violin at age 12 in a special music school, to accept them and not have exams on their performance at age 12 in violin or piano or anything else. Because they might be very talented, but their parents could not get them a great teacher to teach them. It doesn't mean that they don't deserve to go to that school. So I think until a certain age, you should not screen students and track them by their performance, because you cannot measure their potential perfectly. It's unfair. Okay, it's unfair to sort them by their performance. Their performance would be sub-perfect to their potential. Okay? So in Jerusalem, there was a big fight about the school for music and the school for art and the school for gifted kids, whether they are allowed to choose their students. And it wasn't a perfect win. At the end, the solution was, and that's what is implemented now, that those specialized schools can choose 2/3 of their students, and the other third are by free admission with lottery if there is excess demand. And this, at least an opening to perhaps in the future be half and a half, and maybe 2/3 free choice and 1/3 selected by the school. Did I answer your question?
Yes, and the last one was how long ago parents knew that the program was going to start.
Okay, so they didn't, there was a debate in the city for like a year and a half or two, and the school authority worked on the program. The cabinet meeting was in May, I don't remember the exact date, in May of 2013, and parents were informed in about June for a school starting in September 1st of 1993. So kids that finished 6th grade in June 2013 had to make a choice by the summer. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, one comment, when you were talking about free choice, I was just thinking, it's just a little comment, that now here in Madrid, and I suppose in Barcelona, schools have what they call open doors, no? That all the families that they want to get into the schools, they can go to the school one day. And this is kind of new thing, and it's a reflection of this free choice that we have introduced, at least in Madrid, with a district. We had a system that the authorities lead the students to some schools, and then we allow more free choice, no? And that's one reflection of that. No? I suppose that in Barcelona also they could have that, but I know in Madrid. No? And one question is, why did they choose District 9? They only choose District 9 and not another southern districts. And I have another questions about about how do your research. I mean, how could you access to all this data? But I think I can give you, because it's very interesting that you can access all the data and you can work with that data. But I will ask you later.
Okay. I think that information is very important. One of the criticism of choice is that families from poor background or low education background, they don't have information, they cannot access information, they cannot distill information, they cannot compare. You know, for example, in this context, which is a good school, which is a bad school. You know, a good school and a bad school, it's not only something that you can look at the average outcome of the school and see that if one school have a higher average test score, it's a better school. It depends on the students, right? So it's really the value added of the school that is important for knowing which is a good school. You want to send your kid to a school, you want to send it to a school where you expect the school to improve the outcomes of your student, of your child. So information is very important to get parents involved, and at the time, internet was not very developed. We're talking about 1994. That's like 20-something years ago. So the fairs that you, open day that you describe now was what was used then. Parents were invited and to the school, to different schools. They were invited to the primary school of their kids, and then they were provided information, and they were helped filling up the forms. You know, this is very important, how you get parents involved and how you make them choose, okay? You don't want the decision will be a default decision without. And in Tel Aviv, they succeeded to make all parents choose. There was no default school. If you don't choose, there is no school. So they had to come and choose, okay? That was one important strategic element in the program. There is no default schools for your kid, okay? If you don't choose, you know, you'll have to come, otherwise they will randomly assign your kids to one of the 5 schools. So I think providing information of the type you suggest here, and now in the internet today, you know, so it could be that poor families do not have access to computers at home and internet. So they invite them to schools, and they have internet in the school, and they show them everything. I think that's very important in order to avoid this problem of lack of initiative of parents in getting involved in this choice system. Data, to be honest, I was an advisor to the Ministry of Education from 1996 until 2004, external advisor, and close consultant to the Director General of the Ministry, okay? So for my work for the ministry and doing all the analysis for the ministry, I got access to a lot of data, and I was able to convince them to share the data with others, but that's not the data I'm using. I mean, I think there's a general movement in Israel sort of looking towards the Scandinavian countries and copying the access that they have made available to researchers to data. So there is a lab at the Central Bureau of Statistics who have everything in Israel in terms of data in their domain, but they're more bureaucratic and more expensive, and they insist on preparing the data for you, okay, which can take 2 years. The institute and the money is not an issue, really. It's because, you know, it's not a lot of money. The problem is the time and the fact that they are sort of very interventionist in how they want to design, how they want you to use the data, and the Institute of Insurance, the Social Security Institute of Israel, is competing with the CBS, with the Central Bureau of Statistics. They have almost everything there as well. Some of the data that the Bureau of Statistics has, they get it from them. So they opened 5 years ago, or less than 4 years ago, this lab. It's not very convenient. There's only 3 computers. It's kind of, very low in terms of infrastructure. And you can come and work from 8 to 4 o'clock only. And, I have my RAs, waiting in line every week to get a day or two to work. But it's better than the CBS, the Central Bureau of Statistics. And the Ministry of Education, I think, is the best because it has a virtual lab, but they have only their own data. They don't have data from other places, okay? So you can bring them some data, but the other providers of data are not happy about that. So I really think, if you guys can do it, you will see how it has a magic impact. Until 15 years ago, there was no research in Scandinavian countries in the best academic journals in the world in economics. Now, the best papers written on labor markets and human capital and schooling are from data from Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. Finland not, Sweden. So I think that, and now France is doing it, and the UK. The UK is trying to do it, but they don't have the system of IDs. Individuals do not have an ID, so there's no way you can connect administratively. What about Spain? Do you have an ID?
No, we don't have an ID until 16 years old.
60 until 60? 16.
16. When they are 16, it's compulsory to have an ID.
An ID.
Before we have an education ID.
I see.
But it's a problem, the ID.
So you should.
We don't have an ID when we were born.
Yeah. So you should.
It's
Yeah.
not compulsory.
But why not give it at birth at the hospital? It's the easiest. You have everybody,
Yeah.
and we do it.
But it's not compulsory.
Yeah, if you can be careful about protecting privacy, and it's very easy to protect privacy. And researchers in general do not, they're not interested in, especially that it's a repeated game. Once you are caught violating the rules, that's it. You're out. We never allow you access to the data. So I'm so careful and my RAs as well, and everybody, because I know if I will be caught once doing improper use of the data, I will never use the data again. That's going to be, catastrophe. So, anyway.
And why do they choose the district?
Oh, District 9. Okay, well, this is another thing that I'm going to say as a researcher to policymakers. Like in medicine and epidemiology and pharmacology, where we don't do things that are not based on scientific evidence of effectiveness and side effects and externalities and spillovers, we want to implement in social science the same approach. Doing things on scientifically based evidence as much as we can. Don't jump and implement a program when you don't know what will be the consequence of the program, unless you don't have a budget constraint. And even if you don't have a budget constraint, you really want to know what works and what doesn't work. So I was so happy in Tel Aviv, 20 years ago, where they wanted to know what works and what doesn't work, okay? So it was as an experiment, and that's how it was sold to the government. And District 9 was chosen because it was more or less sort of segregated from the rest of the city, on the edge of the city, big enough to have enough schools to be involved, and well organized in a way. And there was this pressure from the parents who wanted the change. And it was more vocal in District 9 than in other districts. Okay? So they chose District 9.
But now they have a spread.
Oh, no. There's, in 1996, in June 1996, already the whole city was involved. No, the whole city was involved. And actually, part of the analysis in the earlier paper, when I look at violence and happiness, etc., it's based not only on District 9, it's based on many schools and many parts in the city. Yeah. So I think this is something always a good thing to say, especially in seminars like this, that and in an audience like you, none of us, or most of us, will not be willing to be put on a surgery table in a hospital in a sort of a procedure that were not tested and used before properly and got the certification of the drug administration or whoever is approving that. We're not going to take a drug that is not approved by the FDA or the Spanish drug authority. I think we should adopt the same approach in social science and education in particular. Let's not jump into doing things at big scales. We can start out something small. We haven't done it for 50 years. It's not going to be the end of the world if we'll test it for 2 more years and then expand, okay? So doing things in an experimental setting, in a smaller operation, finding out what could be the effects, and then extrapolating and implementing it for the general population is always, I think, something that we should adopt.
Well, Victor, thank you so much for the seminar.
Thank you.
I think it has been very helpful for us. We are trying to work hard on letting data for researchers, letting them use data, but we have to first to do it in a right way. But this is our goal. So thank you so much for such an interesting seminar.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.